Hello, a very good morning. Thanks for being with us today. Russia has said yes to an invitation to join the first three-way peace talks with Ukraine and the US.
And there is no delay. Those talks are happening in Abu Dhabi later on today. Well, it follows a mad dash by Donald Trump's special envoy Steve Witkoff, who met Putin at the Kremlin last night to confirm today's talks. The US president spoke to journalists on his way back from Davos, saying everyone will have to compromise to get a deal done.
They'll make concessions. Everybody's making concessions to get it done. Europe is going to be a part of it. It's going to be a part of it. Look, it's more for Europe than for me. I mean, I'm doing this more for Europe than for me. I'm doing it to save lives, number one. I'm doing it secondarily for Europe. I'm not doing it so much for the U.S. It doesn't affect us very much.
Well, Donald Trump's final engagement before leaving Davos was with the Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky, who Trump insists wants to make a deal for the people of Ukraine.
He said he'd like to make a deal. I mean, you know, there's not much you can say. People know the parameters. It's not like, you know, we're discussing things that have been discussed for 6 or 7 months, and he came and he said he wants to make a deal because I wasn't necessarily sure. I think he should want to make a deal. It's pretty tough. It's really tough on the people of Ukraine, I'll tell you that.
Well, this all follows President Zelensky's speech in Davos, which he took aim at Europe in for their inaction against Russia and Putin. Last night, the European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen responded to Zelensky's claims, saying Europe has sufficiently supported Ukraine during Russia's invasion.
We have been supporting the heroic fight of the Ukrainian people for now 4 years. I think on our side, actions speak louder than words. We are the largest supporter of Ukraine in the last 4 years, more than 193 billion euros. And the European Council has just decided to add to this sum another 90 billion euros for the next 2 years. We know that we will never match the sacrifice of the Ukrainian people. But what we can do is stand by their side, and I think the figures speak for themselves, but also the personal engagement of all of us is speaking for itself.
Well, earlier, our Security and Defence Editor Deborah Haynes joined us, providing an update from Kyiv.
Well, there isn't a huge amount of optimism that there's going to be a sudden breakthrough, simply because that last sticking point is the biggest point of all, the biggest obstacle. It's all about the land, the territory. Russia wants to take the whole of the Donbass, that region, Donetsk and Luhansk in the east of the country. Yes, it already controls about 80% of that land after almost 4 full years of its full-scale war, and actually dating back to 2014 when Russia first invaded Ukraine, seizing Crimea. But the Ukrainians still holding on to a section of that area. They have fought and died. It is a red line made in blood, and it is very, very unclear how the two sides are going to be able to reach some kind of compromise. But it's really important to stress just how extraordinary the meeting is going to be today in the UAE, when you have actually senior Ukrainian and Russians officials sitting across the table from each other, sworn enemies. One of the Ukrainian representatives is the man, General Budanov, who headed Ukraine's military intelligence agency until very recently, when he was appointed as President Zelensky's chief of staff. He's actually wanted by the Russians for the role that he's played in helping Ukraine in their attacks into Russia. So it will be very, very extraordinary, the moment that they're all going to be sitting together at a table trying to talk peace.
And Deborah, stay with us. I want to get your thoughts on some controversial comments made by Donald Trump about NATO forces in Afghanistan. First of all, let's take a listen to what he had to say.
I've always said, will they be there if we ever needed them? And that's really the ultimate test. And I'm not sure of that. I know that we would have been there, or we would be there. But will they be there? And let's hope that that never happens. We've never needed them. We have never really asked anything of them. You know, they'll say they sent some troops to Afghanistan or this or that. And they did. They stayed a little back, a little off the front lines.
as you can imagine, huge amounts of criticism about what Donald Trump had to say. And it's not just coming from commentators, it's coming from the UK government as well. I spoke to Stephen Kinnock, the health minister, a little while ago. Here's what he had to say in response to what Trump said overnight.
It just doesn't really add up, what he said, because the fact of the matter is the only time that Article 5 has been invoked was to go to the aid of the United States after 9/11, and many British soldiers and many soldiers from other European NATO allies gave their lives in support of American missions, American-led missions in places like Afghanistan and Iraq.
The mother of the youngest person to die fighting in Afghanistan said that President Trump lacks compassion. I mean, she's right, isn't she?
President Trump's comments are deeply disappointing. There is no other way to say that. I don't know really why he said them.
And Deborah, Stephen Kinnock, not the only person disappointed is his word, but upset by these comments.
Yes, I mean, it's an extraordinary thing for the US president to have said, extraordinarily thoughtless and also not based in fact. British forces have been fighting in Afghanistan since the very beginning, since the US first went to war following the September the 11th attacks back in 2001. NATO forces, as part of the only time that Article 5 of collective defence, that fundamental founding principle of the alliance, was invoked, mobilised to go onto the ground in Afghanistan. Yes, of course, different countries did have different rules of engagement. For example, the French and the Germans operated under different rules of engagement than, for example, the British. But all of them were in Afghanistan. The whole country was a front line. Yes, there were different areas of peril. But for the British, for the Danes, for the countries, the Canadians that were based down in Helmand province and in other areas of the south, they were putting themselves at risk every single day, fighting on the front line, many hundreds of them dying. You'll remember those images of British soldiers being brought back in coffins to Wootton Bassett, and the parades that we would see through the streets, the families that still now are grieving the soldiers that they lost, the soldiers too that suffered horrific injury, not just physical injury, but mental scars that have stayed with them until today. I was in Afghanistan from 2006, going down when British troops first set up their Camp Bastion in Helmand province. At that time, British soldiers were pushing forward into these operating bases where they were fighting and dying, trying to hold ground from the Taliban. And that was a place where they remained until 2014, when they finally pulled back from that part of Afghanistan. So the US president has really opened some wounds here with his thoughtless comments, claiming that NATO troops stayed back from the front line when absolutely they were front and forward.
Absolutely right. Deb Haynes there reporting from Kyiv, reacting to those comments from Donald Trump. Now, Greenland, of course, hasn't been off the agenda for a couple of weeks, it feels now, despite some of the heat being taken out of it a little bit earlier this week.
Well, yes, and now the Danish Prime Minister is meeting the head of NATO to discuss the issue. So let's talk about it a little bit further with our correspondent, Alistair Bunkle. Hi there, Alistair. And there was a great deal of relief, wasn't there, when Donald Trump talked about having reached a framework agreement on the issue of Greenland and backtracked on his threat of tariffs. But how much detail do we now have of what that framework looks like? And do we know if all the parties concerned are happy about it?
We don't really have much detail at all. I mean, a lot of it is guesswork. I think those that have a clearer idea of what might have been agreed or discussed with Donald Trump, the likes of Mark Rutte, the NATO Secretary General, who is meeting with the Danish Prime Minister Mette Frederiksen in his residence here in Brussels this morning for a private meeting. I think they're keeping it pretty close because I don't think they want too many leaks to the media. It's such a fragile situation still. And I think there's actually, frankly, a lot to still sort out. Yeah, I mean, people here and all the EU leaders were here last night for an emergency summit, of which, the steam had come out of it a little bit because the threat of tariffs against European countries had gone away. But I think Greenland is a line. And I think everything that happens from now onwards will be seen as, pre the Greenland crisis and post the Greenland crisis. The mindset here in Brussels, in European capitals, has changed. They know it cannot go on as normal, or what was normal, with Donald Trump any longer. That's what happened. I think the question is how will it change going forward? And that's a harder question to answer. The fact is, a country like America, with a president like Donald Trump, can just be so much more agile than an alliance like the EU with 27 different countries, 27 different national interests. But Europe is trying to become far more united in the way it responds and handles Donald Trump. I don't think we will see the sort of the sycophancy that we've seen from various European leaders in trying to deal with Donald Trump quite so much anymore. I think the Europeans know that they have levers that they can pull that, could potentially hurt the Americans, like trade, for example. I think the Europeans know that they have other allies around the world, Canada, Japan, Australia, and it's going to have to be a different way of doing business. But finally, let's just step back a few days. European leaders arrived here last night with a bit of a spring in the step that they had sort of staved off the immediate threat of what was going on with Greenland. But this is an idea that the US president had threatened to invade European territory. That is not something, and the success of that not happening is not really something European leaders should really be celebrating. It is an extraordinary change in that transatlantic alliance.
Absolutely is. All right. Alistair, for now, thank you for that. We'll keep an eye on those meetings around Greenland that are happening today.
Indeed.
Here on Sky News.